Hi, Dave UHRICH here. Today we're going to talk about chords. There is a topic, chords. This topic is one of the most asked about topics that I get from students. Things like, what makes up a chord? Why is it diminished? What's augmented? What do those things mean? What's are the notes in the chord? Why do they call it that? What? Suspended? Head? Nine? Seventh? Diminished? What? In other words, so there's this ginormous language that music uses for chords. And ultimately, it's important to remember that not an individual person, some crazy freak scientist, music scientist, didn't make these names up some number of years or centuries back in an attempt to try to piss off and confuse aspiring musicians. This language has developed over the course of a number of centuries and by a number of different people in different cultures and different time frames. Having said that, what we're going to do is we're going to try to clear a lot of that up, and we're going to get into it in a pretty similar way. Now, for the purposes of getting into this, we're going to assume with this video that you have some understanding of major scales, and if you don't, please, and I'll say that again, please watch the segment I have on major scales. There's lots of ways to go about getting major scales and understanding major scales, but please watch our video on that. It'll make this as well easier. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to try to make this, even if you haven't got understanding of major scales, going to try to make it at least beneficial for you as well. So, as we move forward, what are chord formulas and how do we determine the notes of the chord? What is a chord? What makes up a chord? Okay, so I'm going to take my trusty little old school eraser here, and alright, we're going to talk about things called chord formulas. So what is a chord formula, or the formula for a chord? Basically stated, the notes of a major scale, I can write them on the staff if you want. I'll do that a little bit over here. Okay, so how about that for cool school? Alright, so this is me just giving a real quick little staff, okay? If I take a look at the notes in the C major scale, okay, these are notes, and I'm going to write the letters directly below this, okay? So if you don't know the notes in the staff, not a problem. This note is a C, anywhere rendered on your instrument, D. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm taking a look at the C major scale. And the C major scale actually is numbered. A super brilliant guy came along and said, let's number the first one, 1, and then after great debate, number 2 is titled 2, and the third one is called a 3 or a third. Okay, so this is not complex in any way. It's just given these numbers. So that's what we refer to the different notes of the major scale. For the purpose of today's what we're doing, the notes of each major scale change. So like in the key of G, it's a different group of notes. In the key of A flat, it's different. Each of the keys has its different note. What remains consistent is the intervals between them. And this is not an issue about what is major scales. This is an issue right now about what is a chord. And so we're going to go back, kind of stay on point here. So you may have heard these names: 7th chords, triads, 9th chords, 11th chords, 13th, or these complex numbers like 7 sharp 9, or oh, I got it 7th, or what the heck, like you got a male, like I don't, whatever. It's complex. So a triad, 1, 2, 3, a 3-note chord is the first way we start to understand chords. Triad, 1, 2, 3. Now, for humor purposes, I would like to add some new names to these chords. Many centuries down the road, people might come up with Dave UHRICH and say, hey, he had some interesting ideas on what to call stuff. So there was never a naming committee on chords. 3-note chords we call triads. 4-note chords, or at least the first group, we're going to call 7th chords, right? You might think they should be called quadads, but they're not. So that'd be what I kind of would call them. 4 notes, quadad. Anyway, but do not call them quadads. No one will know what you're talking about. Anyway, that's just for humor purposes. A triad is a 3-note chord, and the way to start understanding triads is to see that there's a formula of those for these triads. T-R-I-A-D-S. Triads, otherwise known as 3-note chords. A major triad has a formula. Okay? A major triad is the 1 and the 3 and the 5 of any major scale. A minor triad, all right, is a 1, a flat 3, and a 5. Now, I've heard sometimes students will come from another teacher or something like that, and they'll say, yeah, just flat the third, right? But if you don't know what the third is, well, then what does flatting it have to do with anything, right? So flatting the third, flatting the sharping, whatever. Okay, so what does that mean? The notes in a C major chord are the 1 and the 3 and the 5, otherwise known as C, E, and G. Those notes in any order are C major chord. So in theory, if a tuba player plays a C, a trombone player plays an E, and a trumpet plays a G, together they constitute a C major chord. If your bass guitar player in your rock band plays a C, your keyboardist plays an E note, and the guitar player plays a G, together as a choir, as a sort of electronic choir, you're playing a C or a C major chord. Now, just for naming purposes, when somebody goes, can you play me a G chord? The word major just drops off. Major doesn't get as part of the chord. My name is Dave UHRICH. People that know me call me Dave, not Dave UHRICH. My close friends don't say, hey, Dave UHRICH, would you like to get a drink? Hey, Dave UHRICH, would you like to go blah, blah? Would you like to jam, Dave UHRICH? No. In other words, the UHRICH part drops off. The last name amongst close people or friends drops off. When we talk about chords, we go G, that means G major. So, if you hear somebody say, that's a G chord, or that's a G major, that's the same thing, okay? So, we do make a notation for minor chords, or augmented chords, or diminished chords, or other names of chords. So, we'll show what those are. So, a minor triad is C, E flat, and G. So you take the E, and you would put a flat in it. Now, I'm not going to do this for now, but if you want to see what a minor chord is, these notes would be C, E flat, and G, okay? And because I'm not Mr. Chalkboard Maker, I'm going to do this and make a little bit more space. I think in time I should pop for a larger chalkboard, but for right now, this is going to do. This is what we got. So, let's say a major triad, so redoing my work, is 1, 3, and 5, right? So in any key, it's the first and third and fifth. But in the key of C, it's the notes C, E, and G, okay? Interestingly, there's a finite and relatively small group of chords which are called 3-note chords, or triads. Triads, 3-note chords, are 1, 3, 5 for a major, 1 flat 3, 5 for a minor, a chord called D-I-M-I-N-I-S-H-E-D, diminished, which is 1, and flat 3, and flat 5. You might now be going, what the heck does that mean? So 1 and flat 3 and flat 5 is a C, an E flat, and a G flat, right? When we refer, just incidentally, just if you notice we see like 1, flat 3, and 5, right? The note flat refers to the third. Here, C, E, flat. The flat goes on the opposite side. And once again, I didn't come up with this stuff. I'm just passing the information along, okay? Dave UHRICH did not invent this stuff. So, I don't come up with terms. The Musical Supreme Court or Naming Committee of Music has never contacted me. Even if one exists, they don't consult me. So, I'm just passing this info on. So, a diminished triad is 1, flat 3, and flat 5. So, in the key of C major, C, E flat, and G flat. Okay? Now, somebody might ask, hey, could that be an F sharp? Let's watch this. So, F sharp, F is a fourth. So, F sharp is a raised fourth, and G flat is a flatted fifth. So, in reality, it is F sharp. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Everybody knows it's the same. F sharp is G flat. But by the book, so the theory, and by the book, it's a flatted fifth. We would prefer to call it a G flat. Okay, and last but not least, there's an A-U-G-M-E-N-T-E augmented chord, which is 1, 3, and sharp 5, which is C, 3, right, flat sharp 5, following me, and G sharp. Okay, this group is almost finished. The other two chords you could call sus, P-E-N-D-E-D, suspended second, which is 1, 2, and 5, and suspended. God, I forgot how difficult it is to write with chalk. S-U-S-P-E-N-D-E-D, suspended fourth. So this is the kind of chords called suspended chords, all right? And suspended chords are 1, 4, and 5. So these guys, okay, suspended. I like to think of suspended chords as there isn't a third there to choose, whether it's major or minor, okay? A suspended chord, we've suspended, like a jury would say, oh, it's a hung jury, we're going to suspend a decision today, we don't know what it is. So a chord which determines whether or not it's sharp, rather a minor chord or major chord, is the third. See, the third says that's a third for a major chord, and here's the third for the minor chord. E flat versus E. Here, there are no thirds, the 2 and the 4. So in this chord, I'm going to make this list sort of concise for you here by going here and making all of this now very symmetric and very big. So major, I'm just going to put M-A-J. Major is 1, 3, 5, or C, E, G. Minor, and I get to abbreviate. Minor is 1, 3, and 5. Yes, C, E flat, and G. All right. A diminished chord usually is determined by, when you write it on a page, circle. That's how we write it. Circle. It's 1, flat 3, and flat 5, which is C, E flat, and G flat. Okay. Plus is how we determine a chord, or how we write down a chord called augmented. Okay. 1, 3, sharp 5. Ironically, and not incidentally, the word plus, or the letter that, this, mathematical plus sign, sometimes in jazz vernacular and terminology could mean sharped, like another note. But for argument's sake, there's a multitude of systems here, but we're just going to do the C, E, and G sharp. Last but not least, SU sus2 is 1, 2, and 5, and otherwise known as C, D, and G, and then sus4, which 1, 4, and 5 is 1, C, F, and G. So this constitutes the total list, full and complete list, of triads, or 3-note chords, that we need. Now, the list goes up significantly when we start adding a 4th note, okay? And we're going to show you those here as well. We're going to kind of cover that. For the purposes of our demonstration today, it's probably good, if you had any questions about this at all, stop the tape here, go back to the beginning, and kind of look at those, because these, and kind of get familiar with those things in terms, okay? Because that's this note, and this note, all right? Now, if you notice, to build chords in what we would literally call kind of primary triads, if you were thinking in keys, or in this case, sometimes simple chords, this particular system is how we build chords. It doesn't mean it's the only system in understanding chords. It just means it's the system that we first express as educators, right? And liken back to what I first said about teaching, is that it's not like some group of maniacal, twisted, demonic teachers got together in a room and said, we're going to try to confuse the kids, and had these crazy names, okay? Augmented. If I augment your bank account, I've added money to it. I've made it bigger. So the distance from C to G is bigger. If I diminish your bank account, meaning I've stolen money from you, I've made it smaller. It means that these intervals are smaller, okay? Major is the quote-unquote 1, 3, 5 of the major scale. If we make a minor change to the major scale, we call it minor. So I give these names. This might not be right or wrong. It's just how I think of them sometimes. It's, if you can visualize the names of these things, that's also easier to have you remember it, right? Have you been doing that? You're out somewhere and you go, God, that guy just totally looks like my Uncle Bob. His name is not Bob. His name is Ted, or whatever. And you're like, God, I'm going to have a hard time remembering his name. It's Ted. Why? Because you have a connection in your memory, okay? So I would encourage anybody learning to try the best you can to kind of visualize stuff. And that's the way I do it. Augmented means made larger. That's fifth is bigger, right? Diminished means made smaller. This is here, okay? So, and then major and minor and suspended. So when we look at a chord, okay, just for triads, C, when we write it, by the way, like I said, chalk. So, bust. We just say C. That's the chord. If I want to call like a C minor chord, I write it with an M. I've seen all kind of printed versions of it. Sometimes you see sort of a cursive M. Sometimes the C is really big and the M is sort of small. Ultimately, that doesn't matter. Okay? C, so a diminished is a circle. Okay? And C plus is augmented. Now, when you see this, you don't see these other. Usually the plus is over like this. Okay? And C, if I would say C diminished, it's over like that, okay? Whereas like is in C minor, it's below there, okay? And that's just sort of the way that it is. When you see a suspended second chord, like sus2 or sus4, C, S, U, S, 2, that's how it is. Sus is a little lowercase and 2 gets up. Same with C, sus, 4. That's what it would be written down on a page, or like in some standard, like in a music, like a chart or something like that. Does it make sense? So that's how we would do this with triads. Okay. So let's dive now into something with chord formulas called seventh chords. Now, I'm not going to talk about the complete, full, and total list of what we call seventh chords. I'm just going to start you off on a group of seventh chords. We're going to limit the amount of seventh chords that we're going to learn the formulas for, and then I'll have some resources here up on the site on and in future videos about how do we think about those other chords. Okay? But what is a seventh? Basically, you take the 1 and 3 and the 5, you leave those intact as they are, and you add a fourth note. So they're not called quadrads, right? So the seventh in the key of C is this B note, okay, or B here. If you don't know the notes in the staff, just look down here, right, and then whatnot. So all this kind of assimilates. C, that's the letter, that's the number. D, that's the letter of D, and that's the number, right, and forward. And all this was the C major, right, major scale. So moving forward and how we would try to kind of get here is that what is a seventh chord? A seventh chord is the inclusion of the 1 and the 3 and the 5 and the 7th. Now, how they're ordered, which one's higher or lower on your instrument, we're not going to discuss in this video. We could call that inversion, the way they're in voice, or a different voicing. But suffice to say, for this video, we're just going to talk about the formulas of what notes make up those guys, okay? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify this down. I'm going to erase this. I'm going to just put a small version of this up here. Just these numbers, okay? So we don't need the staff anymore. And what I'm going to do is just take the C major scale and say C, G, O, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay? He would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not incidentally, this, if we were going to continue the major scale up, the D, E, F, G, A, okay, all these guys would be like 9 or 10, 11, 12, 13, and on they go. We're not going to talk about these, but all of these would be called compound. C-O-M-P-O-U-N-D. Compound intervals, or intervals greater than an octave, okay? So, because people are usually asked during lessons, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? A term. I'll give you just a short version. Compound intervals include 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and the 9th. Make sense? Or like to have the 11th, we would include all of these we call tertian, or stacking of thirds, included in that. When you get to compound intervals, the intervals themselves and the chords under become much more, a little bit harder for us to get, so we're not going to go there, okay? So we're going to put these on later videos, but just have them here. For the purpose of argument, 1, 3, 5, and 7, we have a chord called major seventh. Okay? Major seventh is 1, 3, 5, 7. That's your formula. Okay? And so these notes are C, E, G, and B. Dominant seventh. Dominant seventh is 1, 3, 5, and flat seventh. Well, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, C, E, G, B flat. Now you're probably asking yourself, you know, this is starting to become a lot of stuff. You expect me to know this, memorize this? Well, how am I going to know that? You will in time, if you use the terminology, in my experience and in my opinion, the more you use this terminology, the easier and easier it gets to use itself, okay? I'm marveled by the fact that I walk into my doctor, even my primary care doctor, not like a specialist, like a surgeon or whatever, I had neck surgery, and so I'm like, these guys are holding on to terms that, like, God, what do they sit at home all? I mean, anyway, the truth of the matter is you don't need to be a neurosurgeon to understand music, but I would suggest that you try as best you can to try to use the terminology often as possible and in the correct vernacular, in the correct language as you can, you know. All too often people get into like a situation like band practice where saying that's a diminished chord, and it's not, or that's a seventh chord, and it's not, or it's something. And so, you know, without being a jerk to folks and say, hey, you know what, you used the wrong term, and becoming the music police, just start using the terminology and try to use it in the correct way. That's my opinion. So, having this, we have another chord called a minor 7, 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7, which, by the way, C, E flat, G, and B flat. You're starting to get a plan here. You see how, like, these guys here all sort of, I could have probably done this a little bit easier to see. And in the modern days of video editing, we're not going to go there. We're just going to do a redo. So how about this? Let me get a little space here. Major seventh. Okay, 1, 3, 5, 7, C, E, G, B. Dominant seventh is 1, 3, 5, flat 7, or C, E, G, and B flat. Minor 7, 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7, or C, E flat, G, and B flat. Now, there's a lovely chord here called minor 7, flat 5, who has also got a lovely name. Sometimes he is called half diminished 7. And you're going to go, half diminished 7? What kind of 7 are you talking about now? Which part is diminished? Which half isn't diminished? So, or at least those folks from Kentucky will be saying that. Anyway, here's the beautiful part. Minor 7 flat 5 is a 1, a flat 3. You add a flatted 5th and a flatted 7. So you end up getting C, E flat, G flat, and B flat. Now the interesting part about this is, where does the arrival of that name, what's the origin of that name? The origin of that name comes to the fact that, this is the easiest way to explain it, in classical teaching throughout universities and conservatories worldwide, for many years, a number of centuries actually, the triad, like we did in this little earlier segment, was called major or minor, but you noticed we had a diminished triad. Interestingly, every interval from one to another note, no matter what the note is to another note, is a distance. And those distances can be thirds or fifths or sevenths, right? So the distance from C to G is a fifth. From C to F is a what? Fourth. From C up to this D, that's a ninth, right? Well, accompanying those 1 and 3 or 5 or third or seventh, whatever, are major intervals, minor intervals, augmented intervals, diminished intervals. You can have a diminished interval or a minor interval. So we're going to talk about intervals once again on a separate video, but to address the question that everybody says, what does half diminished seventh mean? In my opinion, in my mind, this triad is what? A diminished triad. However, the seventh, if we look just from C to B flat, in the video, that's called a minor seventh, not a diminished seventh. The diminished seventh, sometimes called full, D-I-M-I-N-I-S-H. Diminished seventh is 1, flat 3, flat 5, and like it or leave it, double flat 7, C, E flat, G flat, and B double flat. Once again, I am not the author of this stuff. I'm just an information passer around. So we're passing it on. So this triad is diminished, but the seventh is a minor seventh. So I think that name just came from, it's half diminished. Which half the triad said? That's the half that's diminished, and the seventh is not. Here, this guy is a diminished triad, but the seventh here is also diminished. So because we haven't covered those intervals in this video, the distance from C up to B double flat is called a diminished seventh. So when you take a major interval, you lower it to become minor, and then you lower it again to become diminished. So that's probably more information that you needed, but this is the first group of what we call seventh chords and how this happens. So, you know, if you notice, like with seventh chords, there's lots of ways of writing these, okay? Like if you see a chord and it says G flat major seventh, what's major seventh? G flat, major seventh, E flat, major seventh. What is that? E flat 7 sharp 5, E flat augmented, A flat augmented. These are names and your brain just kind of goes, whoa, 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 too much. So let's show you how this goes and how they're written down and whatnot. There's a whole group of seventh chords. There's more seventh chords than this, but this is the start of for this video that I want to do. But if I want to write a major seventh chord, the ways to write it most of the time are just M-A-J-7. Now that's what it's called, major 7. But if I want, I can have any note here, right? So if I wanted to have, say, E flat, the chord is called, there's two pieces of information, the root and the chord type. That's it. So E flat is the root, and major 7th is the chord. It's not an E root with a flat major 7th chord type. Did that make sense? Hopefully you get that. Now, so, or you could have like, you know, like, sometimes I've seen as well, by the way, something like this. If I said like E flat M-A-7, I've seen M-A-J-7. I've seen people write E flat with a triangle 7. Does that mean it's E flat major 7? Well, I think this arrived because somewhere along the line, well before like computers became important as they have become today, maybe when they originally were typewriters, right? And musicians were trying to write music down, they could see there's just a great, you know, a small finite group of little asterisks and things that they could use. Triangle might have been among them. So they said, I'll just call that major 7. And so that's it. I refer to this often, I say, you know, there's not a standardized body of people that regulate what music things and names and things are called. So, for argument's sake, I'm just passing along. There's other ways in which I've seen it written, but that's it. Now, when it comes to dominant 7th chords, D-O-M-I-N-A-N-T, dominant 7th chords, there is one way to write it. So if I said like G, you just write 7. Now, unlike triads, where if you just see a letter, you assume it's major, Here, the system varies. And if you see a letter and then a number like 7, it means it's dominant. Why? I don't know. It means it's dominant if it's a 7th. It means it's dominant if it's a 9th. It means it's dominant if 11 or 13. And here's where I have to say this yet. But if it's a 6th, it's not dominant. No. 6th, we'll make those major. So, again, it's not a perfect system. It's just what it is. There's reasons for that. I don't want to make this like a crazy video either. So, G7, that's it. You could write G, D-O-M, 7, but that would look more like diminished. So I would just say, forget about that forever and ever. It's 7. When you see a chord, that means G, dominant 7. So if you see it written on a page, somebody says, play G7, you know it's dominant, period. It's this formula of notes. Minor 7, G, M-I-N 7. Very common to see G minus sign 7. Same guy. Just, that's the way it is. I actually prefer this, G minor 7. So the information is G and then minor 7, right? This doesn't refer to G and then like a flatted 7th, because like if the plus means augmented, and then that one should mean what? The opposite? Try not to draw that parallel or that conclusion there. This is how we write minor 7. M-I-N 7 or that. I've seen a small M7, little cursive 7s, M-I, whatever. All right? Minor 7, flat 5. I'll do it on, say, G. G, M-I 7, flat 5. That's the way we write him. And you put the flatted 5th in, like we call that sometimes in little parentheses, the Easter basket. That's what I call it. All right? And then in this guy, this could be G, circle, or circle slash, or circle slash 7. That's a way to do it as well. Why? Because it's half diminished, referring to what I said earlier. G minor 7 flat 5, G minor, just all that, that's the same thing. Last but not least, diminished 7th here, G circle 7. As opposed to just G diminished, which would be just, you know, this, right? That's G diminished, the triad, the 3-note chord. G diminished 7th. That's it. So, there's a group of other chords. There's augmented 7, there's minor 7, so there's a whole litany of other ones. Suspended 7, sus4, you know, flat 5, you know, augmented, whatever. What we're not going to do is get into them like this giant volume of chords. What I wanted to do today was just to discuss how we get 7th chords. And these are very usable. Believe it or not, minor 7 flat 5 is a normally occurring chord. Seems like a crazy name, but it is what it is. And so, there you go. Hopefully this clears some stuff up. The group of chords which are compound intervals, intervals that are above an octave, we will deal with in a separate video. So, hopefully that was fun. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you need anything at all, yeah, please try to, you can contact us. We'll try to get answers out to you when we can. Feel free as well to share the stuff with friends and push the like and the subscribe and all that. Yeah, hope you learned some things today. And so, talk to you later.